Let's talk about a story that sounds almost impossible. It's about how a country, supposedly crippled by international sanctions, managed to become one of the world's most formidable missile superpowers. It's truly an incredible journey.
Okay, just picture this for a second. You're in a high-tech defense command center. Suddenly, all the alarms start screaming. The radar screen just explodes with contacts. It's not one or two incoming threats, it's hundreds. And these aren't your average missiles.
Some of these things are tearing through the sky at Mach 15. That's 15 times the speed of sound. And they're not just flying in a straight line. They're maneuvering, zigzagging, making themselves impossible to track for even the most advanced defense systems we have. This isn't some sci-fi movie. This is the new reality in the Middle East, and it was engineered by Iran.
So what kind of numbers are we talking about here? The current estimate is over 3,000 ballistic and cruise missiles. That makes it by far the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the entire region.
And that right there is the big question, the central paradox of this whole story. How on earth did a nation that was supposed to be cut off, technologically starved, and economically crushed end up developing hypersonic weapons? Well, it's a story about desperation, pure ingenuity, and a whole lot of unintended consequences.
To really get how this happened, we've got to rewind the clock. We have to go back to the very beginning, to a brutal war that shaped Iran's entire way of thinking about defense.
So it's 1980. The Islamic Revolution just happened, completely shredding Iran's alliance with the US. Then, Iraq invades. During that horrifying 8-year war, Saddam Hussein, using Soviet Scud missiles, started pounding Iranian cities. They called it the War of the Cities. And for Iran, they had no missiles to fire back, no way to stop the attacks. It was a period of complete and utter helplessness. And that feeling, that total powerlessness, it burned two fundamental lessons into the minds of Iran's leaders. Lesson 1, you can't trust anyone else to protect you. And Lesson 2, if you want to survive in this world, you have to build your own strength. From that moment on, military self-sufficiency became a national obsession.
So out of the ashes of that war, a secret and incredibly ambitious plan was born. Iran was going to build its own missile program completely from scratch. But how do you even start when no one in the world will sell you the technology?
Well, they started with something called reverse engineering. First, they quietly managed to get their hands on a few Scud missiles from places like Libya and North Korea. Then they did what any good engineer would do. They took them apart, piece by piece, studying every single circuit, every valve. And then came the really hard part. They started to copy them and build their own. Now, the guy spearheading this whole secret operation was Hassan Tehrani Moghadam. He was a commander in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and he became the father of Iran's missile program. He and his team of young, brilliant Iranian engineers started with basically nothing, all while trying to stay hidden from Western intelligence agencies. And here's where you see how successful they were. They didn't just make a carbon copy of the old Scud. No, they innovated. They took a North Korean design and created the Shahab 3. And just look at that jump in range, from a measly 300 kilometers to 1,300. All of a sudden, Israel and major U.S. military bases were within striking distance. That was a huge game changer.
Naturally, as Iran's program started to grow, the world noticed, and they responded with some of the most punishing sanctions ever seen. But here's where the story takes a really ironic twist. The very walls that were built to contain Iran, they actually became the scaffolding Iran used to build itself up.
Now, a big part of these sanctions focused on something called dual-use technology. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. We're talking about materials that have both normal, civilian uses and military ones. Think about advanced carbon fiber. You need it for sleek missile bodies, but you also use it to make high-end tennis rackets, or powerful computer processors that can go into a missile's guidance system or your kid's gaming console.
So how did Iran get around this massive roadblock? They came up with a pretty brilliant three-part strategy. First, they set up this huge, complex network of shell companies all over the world to secretly buy these dual-use parts. Second, the IRGC, which is also a massive business empire, used its own money from things like construction to fund research, completely outside of any sanctioned budgets. And third, and this might be the most important part, they poured money into their own people, building elite universities to create a generation of homegrown scientific talent.
So, you fast forward through 40 years of this defiance and innovation. What's the end result? You get an arsenal that is perfectly built for asymmetric warfare, which is just a fancy way of saying it's designed to let a weaker country punch way above its weight.
One of the biggest breakthroughs they had was mastering solid fuel technology.
See, their old missiles used liquid fuel, which takes a long time to load, it's dangerous, and it's really easy for satellites to spot the preparations. Solid fuel missiles, on the other hand, can be hidden away in underground silos, ready to go at a moment's notice. It's a shoot and scoot capability that makes their arsenal incredibly survivable.
And then, in 2023, came the real shocker. Iran unveiled the Fatah, its first hypersonic missile. They claim it can fly at Mach 15 and make unpredictable maneuvers, which would make it pretty much untouchable for any current defense system out there, including America's Patriot or Israel's Arrow 3. This is the kind of tech only a few superpowers have.
And it's not just about fancy missiles. They also perfected drone warfare. And you just have to look at the math here to understand why it's so effective. One of their Shahed drones costs maybe $20,000. The interceptor missile needed to shoot it down, that can cost over $1 million. Their strategy is simple. Bankrupt your enemy by forcing them to use $1 million missiles to shoot down $1,000 drones.
So when you step back and look at this entire 40-year saga, what does it all really mean? Well, a truly stunning paradox starts to come into focus.
It really boils down to this. The very policies that were designed to disarm Iran, to cripple its military ambitions, actually forced it to become completely self-reliant. By trying to isolate them, the West unintentionally created a much more innovative, resilient, and frankly, a more dangerous adversary.
Today, that arsenal they've built from the ground up, an arsenal that's totally free from foreign control, is Tehran's ultimate insurance policy. It's the one thing they believe guarantees their survival on their own terms.
And that leaves us with a huge and maybe uncomfortable question for today's world. Do sanctions actually achieve what they're supposed to? Or, as we've seen with Iran, do they sometimes just force a nation to rise from the ashes stronger and far more unpredictable than before? The answer to that is going to shape global security for a long, long time.
Like, follow, and subscribe for more videos.